Support for WUWM podcasts comes from University School of Milwaukee, fulfilling a values-based mission of developing learners, fostering leaders, and preparing citizens for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. More information at usm.org/mission.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll wrap up our series, How to Evict Your Landlord, all about a large corporate landlord's legal troubles and the tenants who united against him. Then we'll learn about efforts to save piping plovers along the Great Lakes in a new chirp chat.
It was 2016 when I noticed from a picture I had taken that she had an egg. That was the first confirmed nesting of piping plovers anywhere on the Green Bay in 75 years.
Plus, we'll get a snapshot of last weekend's Midwest Gaming Classic. It brings together all types of game enthusiasts.
But we do have open play D&D where it's basically just a table. If you are around and you see a seat open, you can come sit down and play. You can stay for 10 minutes. You can stay for 4 hours if you want.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us. How to Evict Your Landlord is a 3-part series produced by WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez and Lake Effect's Sam Woods. In parts 1 and 2, we learned about out-of-state landlord David Tomlin. He owns over 200 rental properties in Milwaukee and is fighting lawsuits that threaten to cut him off from rental income. We also learned about how his tenants united against him and the city's case for declaring his business model a public nuisance. Today, we examine how the city has tried similar strategies for dealing with negligent landlords in the past, and we finally speak with the man himself, David Tomlin. This is the third and final part of How to Evict Your Landlord.
Calling case number 25 CV 854 U.S. Bank Trust National Association versus RPR.
Early this March, we stopped by Milwaukee's courthouse.
We wanted to drop in on the most recent hearing of U.S. Bank's lawsuit against corporate landlord David Tomlin and his company, Highgrove Holdings.
Good afternoon again, gentlemen.
So this room is impressively large, very ornate. The air was stale. And Sam, we were the only 2 people in the room, besides the people that were paid to be there.
We sure were, and all we knew back then was that the bank was suing Tomlin. The total bill was for over $8 million for failing to pay towards his loans. And U.S. Bank was seeking to receive over 80 of his properties.
So before we called the case on the record, I asked the attorneys to come in to chambers just to talk.
This is the judge, Michael Hanrahan. The judge goes over some of the details of the case, how much money Tomlin owes, what the judge heard from both parties in chambers. But after that, he lets everyone know that no big decisions are going to be made here.
I am deciding that today is not the day to decide the petition for receivership. The main basis for that is that this is a business dispute that's relatively complex. There's a lot of moving parts. Some of the issues...
Test.
After that, we had a little check-in in the court's hallway, and I asked your take since you've been the one that's really been following this case.
It's interesting reading legal briefs. It's like when you're reading through those, they're trying to make their case individually, and so it looks like these 2 just hate each other and can't stand each other, and there's no way they could reconcile. And then you see it happen in person, and they're like, yeah, we might be able to work something out. And no idea.
I think for me, something that stood out was something that was familiar. And it was a delay tactic. And it's kind of the same thing that we experienced trying to get in touch with Tomlin for this story. And when we were in the courtroom, that's something that it seems like Judge Hanrahan called Tomlin's attorney out for because of a last-minute filing.
Pardon, your recent filing was pretty recent. March 10th was 11 pages and a lot of documentation, not all of which I looked at. But I don't want that to happen again.
It seems like Tomlin's attorney kind of waited to the last minute to drop a pretty big document dump to the court and for the judge to read, which it sounds like he didn't appreciate. And I mean, it seems like a stalling tactic. And it's going to be really interesting what that means because, as we know, the city is also coming after these properties and coming after any sort of capital that Tomlin's holding on to at the moment. So you've got what it feels like are two entities, the city and then the U.S. Bank, that both want whatever Tomlin has. I'm Jimmy Gutierrez.
And I'm Sam Woods. We're reporters with WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. And throughout the last 2 episodes, we've shown you how out-of-state landlord David Tomlin and Highgrove Holdings operate as a business, one that keeps rents as high as possible while doing as little upkeep as possible.
For the past decade, Tomlin and his LLCs have been buying up properties across the north side of Milwaukee, over 250 total. And during that time, he has racked up countless code violations, been labeled a public nuisance, both his properties and his business practices, and all because of that, one of his biggest lenders, U.S. Bank, and the city of Milwaukee are coming for him and his properties through a little-used law called receivership.
Today, we're diving deep into receivership, how this has played out before in the city's history, and what can residents in Tomlin's properties expect. And then, finally, we talk with David Tomlin.
The idea of a public nuisance is one of those things that the public probably doesn't see a lot or hear a lot about.
This is West Allis City Attorney Cale Decker.
The definition is quite broad. It just says any condition that might impact the public rights, negatively impact the public rights.
Decker was the assistant city attorney in Milwaukee the last time the city rolled out a receivership charge. This was against the notorious landlord Elijah Muhammad Rashid.
In that case, what he would do is he would typically not repair his properties until ordered to do so by the city, effectively making the city his property manager. And even then, he would accomplish those repairs in a way that were substandard or were likely to repeat. Those are the types of things that the city accused him of, as well as the public nuisance angle included all of his code violations that were unrepaired in a timely manner. There are a number of different theories, but those are the primary ones in which the city alleged against Mr. Rashid.
I have a number of questions on how this process works, right? So one, who decides who gets to be the receiver? Are there like scheduled check-ins, like we're going to check in 6 months, make sure this receiver is actually, not continuing the public nuisance, right? Is there ever a time where it's like, okay, now the receiver's done their job, this can go back to, in this case, into Rashid's hands. Once it's appointed, how it actually works months or years down the line.
So the concept of receiver always starts with one of the parties asking for a receiver to be appointed. Ultimately, the court decides who that is. The court will often ask the parties if they have any preferences or any suggestions as to who could be the receiver, but ultimately the court makes that decision. It's important because that person is then responsible to the court, so the judge has to not only agree with who that person is, but also has to decide the terms in which that receivership will exist. So does that mean monthly check-ins? Does it mean that that receiver is good for, they can do their work until a certain event happens? I think in the receivership case for Rashid, every month or two, that receiver would provide a written report to the court on the ongoing efforts that the receiver was making in trying to fix up properties and organize rent rolls, ensure that properties, when there were code violations that had urgent needs, were getting addressed.
Sam, can I ask a dumb question? What happened to Rashid and his properties? Did this work?
Not a dumb question. But first off, there are actually 2 receivership charges happening at the same time. So one is against Elijah Muhammad Rashid that Cale Decker is running through right now. The other was against another problem landlord, Mohammed Chowdhury. In Chowdhury's case, the receiver took him out of business. For Rashid, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Originally, Rashid's properties weren't put into receivership, but when it became clear that he wasn't going to abate the nuisance on his own, the court appointed a receiver. And while his properties were managed by a receiver, he actually transferred ownership of the properties to his family. So to answer your question, did receivership evict Rashid? It's complicated. And so I wanted to ask Decker what he thought of receivership and how effective is it really?
Given all the options currently out there in the law, I think it's the most effective one. In the past, there's been attempts to render forfeitures against property owners, or you build up municipal court violations because of code violations. That is only effective if the person pays. You've also had things like issuing orders against property owners saying that should fix it, and it works. But if you're issuing orders every single time and the person doesn't do anything preventively and instead just sits around and waits for orders, it's also not as effective. So like anything else in code enforcement or police work or anything else like that. The general tools will work 80% of the time. The remaining 20% takes a more specialized tool, which will work 80% of that time. You're always going to keep going until there's a small number where all your general tools are just not working. This is the opportunity, and this is the type of tool that is sort of the last one. And that is because it directly impacts the revenue stream. That is the one thing that a property owner needs to make their properties worth it. They need a revenue stream. A receivership cuts that revenue stream to zero. So that's why it is the most impactful. It's also the most work. It's also used the least for that reason.
While it's impossible to know for sure if receivership will ultimately evict Tomlin from Milwaukee, given that he owes over $8 million to just one lender in U.S. Bank and other lenders are suing him as well, it seems from the outside that Highgrove is desperate for income. And Jimmy, I'm no lawyer, I'm no banker, I'm no economist, but looking from the outside, it's hard to see Tomlin and Highgrove survive without months or even years of collecting income from rent.
That's a tall task, and I think maybe what we should just do is ask him. Because after months of reaching out, we finally got him on a call. Highgrove Holdings founder and corporate out-of-state landlord, David Tomlin. That's next. Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you for jumping on and talking with us.
Great. I know Valia is going to be joining us here in just a second.
Okay. Would you like to wait for her?
Yeah, if you don't mind, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Tomlin agreed to a Zoom call with us as long as his PR rep could join in, and they gave us a 15-minute window. We started out by asking about Deshaun Harris's property and fact-checking what we could. She was the Tomlin tenant from episode 1.
We did tour the place, and there are a number of things that she's, not particularly happy about. Giant hole underneath her porch, bathtub knob stripped, overgrowth in the backyard with wires running through, and a bullet that's been lodged in the wall since last summer. She seems like that's, to her, hasn't rose to being a good landlord of kind of fixing those issues. So I want to give you the chance to speak to that.
Sure, I appreciate it. First of all, my company in Highgrove, very, very, very much committed to the city of Milwaukee in spite of all that's going on right now. We're in lockstep with the city of Milwaukee. And
jumping in here because this goes on for about the first minute of his answer. Lots of deflecting before getting into Deshaun's claims specifically.
Things about the bathtub and everything like that, we have nothing on record about that. That's number one. The bullet holes in the window were taken care of. And I understand the bullet hole in the wall, because I double checked that. We're all taken care of in December with that. And the situation of the hole underneath, that should have been taken care of. That was a water line replacement that we did back. I don't have the exact date.
Hey, David,
was a water line.
Yeah. Can we jump in here real quick? Thank you for answering those. I think Sam's got something else.
Yeah, so mentioned the window that the bullet came through was taken care of in December, and that the hole underneath the porch should have been taken care of. Now, Deshaun notes that the bullet window, that was 5 months afterwards, and it was, obviously December here gets a little cold, and also curious what happened to, the hole should have been taken care of, so what happened?
Well, I explained this to her. I said, Miss Harris, this is not an emergency item. We will get to it. You have people going on vacation. You were going into wintertime. Our priorities were DNS health and safety issues. And I explained that to her. I said, but we would get there. Her concern was getting it done before her family came out for Christmas time. And I said, we would make sure that was done. And it was done prior to her time with Christmas time.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, David. Appreciate you jumping in there. I just want to follow up on, you had talked about having like a really strong relationship and working relationship with the city. At the same time, the city has filed lawsuits against you and claiming for this receivership law that they're looking for to reclaim a whole bunch of properties or to abate them and get them in working order. So I guess, what is your take on the receivership? Because it feels like this is pretty historic that they've teamed up with Common Ground and tenants here, and that they've found enough to find fault with in being a public nuisance, both in your properties and the way that you run a business.
Yes. Again, we're committed to the city of Milwaukee. We're committed to our residents, 2 years ago, I had a meeting with the mayor. He introduced me to Claire Schlocker of her office that I work with. And working with Claire and with the head of the DNS, we were able to put our properties into special enforcement. And that's worked out very well. We have an assigned inspector. There are two classifications. We have the major properties that what you saw in the news that were part of this contractors walking off that take permits, architects, plans submitted, all of those types of things. And all that's going to be done, by the way, with our new financing coming in, which the city knows about, our lenders know about, they're working with us by the end of the year. But right now, we are current on any current DNS things that are coming up. And these are more of the minor situations with that.
I think a lot of people are going to hear this and are going to hear and see all of the reporting and see the press conferences, and that half of your portfolio is snagged up in this receivership law. You've got U.S. Bank, which we sat in on, one of these court cases with your attorney and their attorneys. It's a lot of work that has to happen. What are your future plans for Milwaukee? Like, you have a lot of properties that I think from what we're hearing from not just Deshaun, but Samantha and Sean and Ebony and all of these folks had substandard issues in your property specifically.
In terms of our lenders and everything like that, one of the mistakes we did was we stopped bringing in investor money because we had the problems with the contractors. We had problems with COVID. We had problems with inflation. We have not evicted anybody because our tenants are suffering right now. We have not evicted anybody since September of 2024 on the record.
There's a lot being thrown out here that we're going to go over in a second. But what you should know is that while we had Tomlin in this call, he did admit that Highgrove made some mistakes, but he never apologized. Not to the city of Milwaukee, not to his paying tenants, not to Deshaun. No contrition for a lot of the people's experiences in his properties.
We both need to be somewhere in 9 minutes.
No.
We went a little long.
Yeah, appreciate
it. We appreciate it.
We'll be with you some more.
Okay.
More to continue. Thank you, everybody. We'll be out there with you.
Recording stopped.
Sitting with his tape right now, I think we just need to go over some of these claims that he made and just fact check. And I think the first thing that we need to do is that he made this claim of falling behind on his properties, which he repeated a few times because 3 of his contractors went belly up during COVID. So what should we know about that?
Yeah, so Common Ground and Tomlin himself made clear that those contractors were only responsible for about 20 homes. And as a reminder, that's less than 10% of his Milwaukee portfolio. And remember, Common Ground is the organization that's been at the heart of organizing his tenants to speak out, documenting their issues with his properties, and really driving this lawsuit to the city.
Okay, so another huge claim that was made is that there are no open DNS claims or code violations, basically, on his properties. He tried to specify that's only over the past 6 months, but what should we know about that?
You remember talking with John Johnson from Marquette?
Yep.
So Johnson put together a whole spreadsheet of open code violations on his properties and listing some as recent as January. And now it's possible that Tomlin took care of everything in the last couple of weeks between when that list was generated and when he talked to us. But given that he was generating dozens of new violations about every other week at the time, I do have my suspicions about that claim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that document, so I'd have to say same. There's something else that he brought up multiple times that we need to talk about, and that was his stated commitment to the city of Milwaukee. He sounded dead set that he is not going anywhere, even if the city and U.S. Bank are coming for his properties. I guess that's a claim only time will tell, but we do need to think about the other players in the story.
Evan Goyke and the city attorney's office are pushing hard. They've studied Decker's takedown of previous problem landlords, and they're new to the office, and they see this as a big opportunity to send a message and start a legacy.
And we know Kevin Solomon and Common Ground are all in. They're still sending out press releases to this day, organizing press conferences, and even exposing some new issues Tomlin tenants are facing. And of course, there's Deshaun Harris.
So around early March, a woman stopped by Deshaun's house. She told Deshaun that her home was sold and that it didn't belong to Tomlin anymore. This was the first Deshaun had heard about it, and it made her really nervous because she had all these questions. What did this mean for the rent that she already couldn't afford? or all of the work she was still waiting to be done on her home.
That it wasn't no surprise, but it was just how you sell this and don't send nothing in your tenants that you sold the property to somebody else. You know, it's scary because you don't know if this person gonna ask you to move or what. If you don't got the resources, don't got common sense to know. So my hope is that by being in transition, as this property's supposed to have been sold now, I hope it don't end that way for me. You see what I'm saying? It can go any way.
While the new owners have yet to tell Deshawn what their plans are with the property, Common Ground isn't waiting. They're planning to rehab Deshawn's home soon, fixing her bathroom, patching the bullet hole in her dining room wall, and making the home livable again.
And when it comes to the sale of her home, I think there's a final note to take away from it. Even though Tomlin doesn't own the property anymore, it's the way that it was handled that tells us something about him and his business model. These properties are commodities. So are the residents and the people that live in them. There was no outreach here like he told us there is on the Zoom call, where he really talked up his relationship with residents.
And while Highgrove's property empire may have peaked in Milwaukee, out-of-state corporate landlords are still a problem, one that Common Ground and the city of Milwaukee will be keeping an eye on. And what happens with Tomlin could set a precedent for how the community takes on future negligent landlords.
So y'all be safe.
You too.
You as well.
Y'all need to get in touch with me.
Got you.
No.
That was the final installment of How to Evict Your Landlord, a series produced by WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez and Lake Effect's Sam Woods. Parts 1 and 2 are available at WUWM.com. Tune into Lake Effect tomorrow to hear the entire series. Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen whenever you like. Find it where you get your podcasts, then remember to subscribe, download, and listen on demand. In about 15 minutes, we'll visit the Midwest Gaming Classic, a Milwaukee event that brings together all kinds of gamers. But first, we'll take a trip to the Green Bay area to check in on an endangered bird species.
We had 11 pairs of Great Lakes piping plovers in the state of Wisconsin last year, 4 here at the Cat Island Restoration Chain where we are today, and then 7 at the Apostle Islands up in Ashland County, Wisconsin.
Keep listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Piping plover season is officially underway here in Wisconsin. This year marks 10 years since the shorebirds started nesting in Green Bay after being gone for decades. The Great Lakes population of piping plovers is federally endangered and at risk of habitat loss, predation, disease, and climate change. Tom Presby is the Wisconsin Conservation Manager for Audubon Great Lakes, and Jade Arneson is a fish and wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They say the Cat Island Restoration Chain in Green Bay is an important nesting site for the Great Lakes population of piping plovers. Conservationists are monitoring the birds there and working to restore their habitat. To learn more about the ongoing recovery efforts, Lake Effect's Grit Nunez spoke with Presby and Arneson for this month's Chirp Chat.
We're here at Cat Island Chain Restoration Site in the Green Bay area to talk about piping plover recovery efforts. But before we dive in, for listeners who aren't familiar with piping plovers, can you describe what kind of bird piping plovers are and what they look like?
Piping plovers are shorebirds that are a little bit smaller than a killdeer. People might be familiar with killdeer because those are birds that often nest in gravel parking lots and sometimes do their broken wing displays. Well, piping plovers are a close relative of them. They're both in the plover family. However, piping plovers are a lot rarer. They're about the size of your fist. Unlike killdeer, which will nest in a lot of different spots, piping plovers need undisturbed beaches on the Great Lakes to nest.
You know, the Great Lakes coast is part of their breeding grounds, but where do they travel from?
Yeah, so piping plovers, like a lot of birds, their life cycle is not bound by political boundaries, state lines, country lines, anything like that. These birds that nest in the Great Lakes mostly winter on the Gulf Coast and the southern Atlantic from about South Carolina through Georgia and Florida, and some of our birds even over as far west as Texas. But there are a few plovers in the Great Lakes that actually winter on Cuba and in the Bahamas as well.
And since you mentioned that they enjoy habitat that is sandy and near the coast, what do they eat?
Piping plovers, you might not think of them as a ambush predator like your favorite carnivore, but when you watch them, that's what they're doing, is they're ambushing prey. They stand there, they look around, they have good vision, and when they see an insect such as a beetle or any other kind of insect, they run after it quickly, catch it, and then do the same thing over and over again. So that run, stop style of feeding, that's exactly what they're doing. They eat all invertebrates. Sometimes they're picking through the water line, and sometimes they're hunting in drier beach and dune-like habitats that aren't even that close to the actual shore.
Yeah, they're like the least suspecting carnivore, to be honest.
Yeah.
And, you know, piping plovers are an endangered species. I was wondering if you could tell me more about that. How have piping plover population numbers changed over the years?
So piping plovers were listed as federally endangered in 1986. And at that time, there's estimated to have been 17 pairs of piping plovers across the Great Lakes region. And they all were just within the state of Michigan. So 17 pairs only at the time of listing. And their population has slowly been trending upward in a positive direction, which has been fantastic to see. For a couple of decades, they hovered around an average of 70 pairs. But then in 2023, we had a record-breaking pair count of 80. So the first record-breaking pair count of 80 since listing under the ESA. We all were very, very excited. And since that 2023 record-breaking pair count, we've again slowly been growing each year. Last year in 2025, we had 88 nesting pairs across the Great Lakes region.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think only 17 breeding pairs at one point just in Michigan, none in Wisconsin. How are we doing in Wisconsin today with piping plover populations?
So last year in 2025, Wisconsin came in second for having the highest productivity across the Great Lakes region. So we're really proud of that. We had 11 pairs of Great Lakes piping plovers in the state of Wisconsin last year, 4 here at the Cat Island Restoration Chain where we are today, and then 7 at the Apostle Islands up in Ashland County, Wisconsin.
What are the different threats that have led to the decline of piping plovers and the threats they continue to face today?
So initially, leading up to the time of listing in the 80s, it really was development of our Great Lakes shorelines and, of course, also recreation along our Great Lakes coast. Today, those threats have kind of started to also transition into increasing predator populations, specifically mesopredators, mammalian predators like Coyotes have become really a big one, but also avian predators. Merlins, they're one of our smaller falcons, have really started to become regionally abundant and have started to present a growing challenge for conservation of Great Lakes piping plovers. And then also lake levels. So right now, northeast Wisconsin has been dealing with some record rainfall for the month of April, some localized flooding. So we're starting to see our lake levels come up as a result, but we're coming off of some low lake level years, which have really benefited piping plovers. But that, of course, cycles with years where there's been higher lake levels that have, lessened the amount of shoreline habitat that's available for nesting, for example.
Thank you so much for setting up all this context for our listeners, this background on piping plovers. We talked about it a little bit, but I'm wondering where Wisconsin fits into helping piping plover populations come back up.
So Wisconsin's story very generally has historically had a stronghold and a foot within Ashland County at the Apostle Islands complex. So they are foundation of Wisconsin's piping plover population. I am not recalling a date at the top of my head for where that story started, but they did have roughly a couple decade long gap where there were no piping plovers nesting within the Apostle Islands complex, but then those populations started to come back and flourish again. And then the Cat Island restoration chain story sort of came online, if you will, in 2016, and I'll let Tom speak to that really amazing story.
Yeah, so before I tell the plover story, just a little bit of background on Cat Island. So this is all material that has been dredged out of the main channel of Green Bay, so freighters and other ships can get through, and the bottom of the bay is deep enough for them to do so. That first and second year when they put dredge material here, it happened to be basically pristine white beach sand. And it was obvious that we had just created a nice Great Lakes beach out here, and it's undisturbed because this U.S. Army Corps of Engineers facility where they're doing active dredging for the next 30 years or so. But the goal of the project was not only to have a place to put dredge material for the next several decades, but to provide wildlife habitat both directly and indirectly by breaking up wave energy to protect wetlands down to the southwest corner of the bay, like in the Duck Creek area. So the first year that there was new sand out here that had been dredged in, a pair of piping plovers was found. This is in 2015, but they showed up pretty late in the summer, so we knew they probably were not going to nest. But in 2016, lo and behold, a pair came back in May, and we were really excited because we thought we might have the habitat out here. And sure enough, it was May 24th, 2016, when I was watching a female and noticed, actually from a picture I had taken and zooming in on my camera screen, that she had an egg under her. And that was the first confirmed nesting of piping plovers anywhere on the Green Bay. So from here up to Escanaba in 75 years. And birds have tried before occasionally, but ended up failing either to their nest being washed out or other unknown reasons. But this was the first successful nesting because that pair ended up fledging 3 chicks that year. And that was also the first record of nesting in Brown County. So maybe it happened way back before we had bird watchers out monitoring, but to our knowledge, that's the first time that plovers have nested in this part of the bay. So adding a second consistent spot, Jade mentioned that the Apostles is kind of the foundation of their population in Wisconsin, but now that we've had successful nesting here at Cat Island for the last 10 years, it's been extremely important to their Great Lakes population as a whole to add another consistent population in Wisconsin.
I'm Lake Effects expert Nunez, speaking with Jade Arneson and Tom Pretzby about piping plover recovery efforts in the Green Bay area. So now that we've established how piping plovers and the Cat Island go hand in hand, What do recovery efforts for piping plovers look like today?
So it really, really takes a big team. We've got more than 30 people on our team monitoring, and we're out here every day, no matter what the weather, between about early April and late July to early August, depending on when our last birds leave for their fall migration. Usually somebody's out here for about a couple hours on average, keeping track of what birds they're seeing and also how those birds are behaving. So monitoring really does have a lot of things that people are looking for every day. Another really, really big one is predators. We had an instance a few years ago where a common grackle ate eggs out of a nest. So monitors giving us information on predators that are lurking near known nests, sometimes even intervening when a predator is actively going after a plover, all is really, really important. So it's really fun to come out here and monitor, but there is a lot of responsibility on these monitors' plates every day.
So this work that's being done in Green Bay is just one part of a major recovery project across the Great Lakes. What's the long-term goal of this recovery project in general?
Yeah, fantastic question. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has a recovery plan for the species that was published, I believe, in 2002. But really the big goal is to see at least 150 breeding pairs across the Great Lakes region. Last year we had that record 88, so we have a ways to go yet. At least 50 of those 150 pairs we would like to see established outside of the state of Michigan. So Michigan really continues to be the stronghold for the population. So of course, in order to see that population grow and be healthy and stable, we would like to see them be successful breeders outside of the state of Michigan. Again, we had 11 in the state of Wisconsin last year, just to provide some perspective. Another piece to the recovery goal gets at the productivity component, so seeing at least an average productivity of 1.5 fledglings for every breeding pair. We usually see, 4 eggs laid in a nest cup. We also hope to see habitat continue to be protected and restored and enhanced. That's really a big piece of recovering this species too, as well as education and outreach.
Well, we're getting close to the end of Chirp Chat, but I want to ask, what can people do to take care of piping plovers and support these ongoing recovery efforts?
Cat Island is really important for birds because of the habitat that's here and also because it's protected. There's some birds that we're all very familiar with that disturbance isn't really a big deal, but for birds like shorebirds, not being disturbed while they're trying to fuel up on their migrations is extremely important, which is why it's so important for when you see piping plovers or other shorebirds on publicly accessible beaches to share the shore by respecting them with a good distance, keeping dogs on leashes, picking up any garbage that you see, being stewards of that beach that we're lucky enough to share with these species.
Well, Jade and Tom, we've reached the end of Chirp Chat, but before we wrap up, I always love to ask guests to shine a spotlight on a bird for the month. So I was wondering if there is a bird or a specific piping plover that you like to highlight for this month.
Yeah, so we'll talk about piping plovers, and they're fascinating birds. Our king of Cat Island, quote unquote, here, Obi, who's back for his 9th year now. He actually hatched somewhere else, so he's 10 years old. We know that he has been responsible for 26 chicks that have fledged over the last 8 years. Very, very impressive and productive numbers. And the female that he typically breeds with, Violet, is the female who's back right now. She is in her 8th year at the site, and she's been responsible for fledging 23 birds over those years. So we know all of that because of banding, and it's really, really cool to be able to tell the stories of these birds, shine a light on how unique and how good they are at overcoming all of the obstacles that they face, not only during the breeding season or wintering season, but also on their migrations.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing Obi's story and sharing this incredible story of the Cat Island chain restoration site and the piping plover recovering effort. This is just really incredible work that's being done in Wisconsin, and I'm excited for more people to learn about it.
Thank you so much for having us and for coming up here.
Yeah, thank you again for inviting us and allowing us to share the story of these amazing birds. Appreciate it.
Tom Presby is the Wisconsin Conservation Manager with Audubon Great Lakes, and Jade Arneson is a fish and wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They both spoke with Lake Effect's Grid Nunez at the Cat Island Chain Restoration Site in Green Bay, Wisconsin. You can learn more about piping plover recovery efforts and listen to other Chirp Chat interviews at wuwm.com. Coming up, we'll hear from some of the gamers who gathered last weekend at the Midwest Gaming Classic here in Milwaukee. That's next on Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. This past weekend was the 25th annual Midwest Gaming Classic. The Gaming Expo brought a wide variety of gamers to Milwaukee's Baird Center. Everything from pinball and Nintendo to puzzles and Dungeons & Dragons. Lake Effect's Joy Powers headed to the Midwest Gaming Classic to hear from some of the people who make up the event. And she starts with a familiar voice.
Just ran into Matt Wild. Matt Wild, how long have you been going to the Midwest Gaming Classic?
I've been going for, at least like 15 years, back when it was at like outside in the parking lot of the Brookfield Sheridan Hotel. There was just some tents out in the parking lot, some stuff in a couple of conference rooms, and now obviously it's just a huge, huge thing.
What keeps you coming back?
What keeps me coming back is pinball. I love pinball. I love all the new machines that you really get a chance to play, really, sometimes for the only time. This one for the 2026 MGC, the big pinball table to play is Beetlejuice. It's a brand new table, came out just this year, so I've been trying to get on that machine. There's a ton of them here, and there's just a ton of pinball everywhere. It's amazing. And I just love the atmosphere. I love the people. I love that everyone is here like under a common geeky, nerdy interest, and it's a good time to hang out with my people.
Can I have you say your name and your title?
Tanner Petch, homebrew pinball designer.
Now you're really making these machines. Some machines are more like converted machines that people then redesign the art, maybe redesign certain elements, but you've fully built this. Can you explain kind of what goes into that?
Yeah, so my games in particular are weird games just because that's what I'm interested in pinball design. So like the two I have here, one is really small because I wanted to see how small of a game I could build with normal size pinball hardware and also still have it be a full rule set game and not just like a novelty game. And then the other one I have is really wide but really short and has a bunch of weird little play areas besides the main play field. The way I make these games is it usually starts with some kind of weird idea I want to explore, like the little game, making a game as small as possible. And so from there, it's designing the play field to have a design that I think would play pretty well and be fun to play. And from there, You have to build the cabinet that's going to house the game. You've got to cut the playfield. You've got to put all the mechanisms and switches and wiring on the playfields. You've got to programming them. It's a little bit of a process.
As a game designer, is it really nice to come to these kinds of expos, conventions where like you can watch people play your games?
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's both the aspect of the community of other people who've made games who come to these things, and you can commiserate over everything that goes wrong and celebrate each other's games. And then there's also the general public that come and, have no idea what these games are and play them, and getting to see people experiencing them for the first time and all the weird little things that have going on. And it's fun in both those ways.
Tom Dunk with Guys, Games, and Beer. This is our 14th year as a group here. We've been with the Midwest Gaming Classic since the old Sheridan days at the hotel. And it's been quite the ride. We literally started out in a single small hotel room that they would take the bed out of, take all the furniture out, and you'd move your games in. So we bought, at that time, our personal collection, and we brought it out there, we set it up, we let people play it, had a great time, met a lot of great people. Love the whole community aspect and family aspect that the Midwest Gaming Classic has. The next thing you know, the next year we're like 2 rooms, and then we're a small ballroom, and then they moved over here to the Barrett Center, and we were a small ballroom, and now we're a very large ballroom. And this is literally all Rob's and Ryan's and Larry's and Travis's and my gear. This is all personally owned collection that we bring out and let people play. You'll play games here you won't play anywhere else. We have the world's largest collection of Steel Battalion. So Steel Battalion was a game for the original Xbox. It's about a 20-some-year-old game. 132 button controller. The controller cost more than the original Xbox did. You can play against your friends, blow them up. We've got Cursed Halo networked. We've got Quake on old school Macintoshes. And that's what Guys, Games, and Beer does. We keep all these old games alive. So.
Interesting. So how many games are in this room?
Wow, okay. We're running about, there's about 15 what we call cabs. That's cabinet games. A lot of Japanese candy cabs. We love our Japanese stuff. We go pretty regularly over there and pick stuff up and bring it back. There's probably a good 500 games in this room right now, in this room alone.
I'm Kevin Zirkelbach, and I am a droid builder. I'm lucky enough that I found this R2D2 Builders Club that's been around since 1999, and it is like a nonprofit group of builders all over the world who make replica robots, Star Wars robots. So I discovered them about maybe 15 years ago, and I kind of lurked for a while, and then I downloaded the plans that they had online for free, built my first one out of cardboard, and then I made one out of styrene, put motors in him, and it's just a community of like Star Wars nerds and builders who like making stuff.
How long have you been coming to the Midwest Gaming Classic?
This is actually my first year here, and I have to tell you, this is like one of the nicest events that we've been to, and we're just thrilled to be here.
To describe a little bit about what this looks like, you have a lot of little droids here.
The little droids, we call them baby droids. This is something new that we've brought to the booth in the last couple of years. One of the members of the R2 Builders Club made these little baby droids available so you could 3D print them. They're very simple. They just have like 2 little motors in them and very simple controllers. And so people would come to these events, especially like smaller children, they want to drive the big R2, but for many reasons we can't let them. So we built these baby droids and created like a baby droid playpen where people can scratch that itch and drive the droid around.
They're very cute.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, they're a big hit, and they're a lot of fun to build and a lot of fun to drive. And
the big ones, I will say, are very impressive. When I came in, I saw one of them moving around, and they really move like what you would see in a film.
Well, that's our goal here is to create an exact replica. And the club, having been around since 1999, they've really like fine-tuned the measurements and everything, so they're as exact as possible to the ones you see in the movies, and that's part of the charm.
I am Dan Glass, and I am the operator of Dragon Sandbox D&D event planner, I guess, for a lack of a better title.
Yeah, one of the things that you're doing here is you guys have tables set up. People can, it seems like, just kind of join a game. Is that right?
Yeah, so we call it, during these conventions, it's very hard to, sit down or have people sit down for 3-4 hours at a time. Because there's so much to do, and people got schedules and they got other things to do. So we don't really schedule anything as far as our DMs go, and have certain things scheduled. But we do have open play D&D, where it's basically just a table. If you are around and you see a seat open, you can come sit down and play. You can stay for 10 minutes. You can stay for 4 hours if you want. It's just what you feel and what on your time schedule.
How is the tabletop community here?
In Milwaukee or in Midwest Gaming Classic?
Midwest Gaming Classic, both.
I would say in Milwaukee it's awesome. There's a lot of cool new spaces that have been opening up, so we're excited to see that. And in Midwest Gaming Classic, I would say it's more video game based, but we come to these conventions because we want to be one of one and not one of many. Yeah, it's great. Anytime you can expose somebody to the brand, I guess, the D&D brand, and they know they're well aware of it, having the in-person actual playtime is great.
The 25th Annual Midwest Gaming Classic was held this past weekend at the Baird Center in downtown Milwaukee. And that wraps up the show for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, just download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll bring you all 3 installments in the How to Evict Your Landlord series. It's about tenants, a community organization, and the city of Milwaukee rallying together against an out-of-state landlord. That's tomorrow, but for today, thank you so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM Milwaukee's NPR.